Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Trailblazer Podcast. I'm your host, William Walker. And on the Trailblazer Podcast, what we do is we tell the stories of men who have decided to live and lead their lives in just a different way, making small differences in the world that they have influence over. Today, we have a special guest and good friend of mine, Jono Brake. Jono Brake is a longtime executive business coach. He's been in this industry for over 20 years, as well as has a extensive background in marketing and other amazing stories of just life and from all over the world from where he's lived. So today, I'd like to just welcome to the show, Jono. Jono, welcome, man.
G'day, mate. How you doing?
Good, brother. Man, you sound all stiff all of a sudden, and just like what's going on there? I just anyway, um,
Warm me up, man.
just warm me up, man. I just give you a little rub on the head, just woo.
There you go.
But hey, man, I just want to say welcome to the show. I've been wanting to get you on and kind of tell your story. I know who you are from our relationship, as friends and as business partners, and just how you have led your family and how you live your life, and really how you pursue your passions in the business world, and really truly believing that that your calling is to build a marketplace church, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
with work
100%.
along with business leaders. And so I'm excited to kind of tell some of that story and just kind of everything you got going on when we get into this today. All right.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah, mate. Go for it.
Awesome. Well, cool. Everything whenever I do a podcast with somebody, one of the first things I like to do is really kind of make sure that our guests, our listeners, they get a chance to kind of know the story of where you came from, where it all started. So why don't we just start there, man? Like, where'd you grow up? What was it like growing up? Were what's your mom and dad do?
I mean, can't you tell I grew up in America?
I
Yeah.
did, man. I knew that. The accent did not give
Well,
you
I
away
did.
at
I
all.
did grow up in America, but that was only the last 8 years. Yeah. Look, obviously, no. Well, actually, I mean, if in America, it could be England, South Africa, New Zealand, or Australia. But I am Australian, and so we moved to the US 8 years ago. Grew up on the east coast of Australia, like most Australians. Grew up in a city, 250,000 people, industrial city. My dad was small business owner. He was a pharmacist. Mum was a stay-at-home mum because that was kind of normal back then, and she ended up being a school teacher. And I think she was a school teacher before we were born. I'm the middle of two boys. We're all about 18 months apart. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I had kind of the fortune of a great education. In Australia, I was a violinist. I probably still am, I guess, but not as good now as I was back then. So I had the fortune of going to one of the top music schools in Australia to do high school, and then went to the Australian National University and Canberra University, where I did an undergrad in political science and sociology, and a grad in marketing. And
Ooh,
probably just in my first probably my first degree was when I, started to really get this kind of strong sense of calling. I would say, a real faith awakening for me, and so, that's where, this whole sense of, pastor in the marketplace, building the church, the kind of that initial conversation was this sense of God saying, I'm calling you to build the church, but it won't look like the church does today. And that was back
mm.
in 1991. It's a, it's a, it's a
we
little
we
while
don't
back.
have to age. We don't have to definitely we share how old
It's
we
all
are.
good.
So no,
I
it is
mean,
all good, man.
yeah, we're, we're,
So
we're
what
in our
was it?
50s, we're in our 50s and enjoying the journey, right?
What was it like growing up? I mean, for you growing up, I mean, were you obviously you were a violinist, you're a musician, but you said your dad was an entrepreneur. What
Well,
and
Dad
he had
wasn't
his own
really an
business?
entrepreneur. He was a pharmacist. I mean,
Okay.
back in the day, I mean, it's only more recently we've really talked about the business experiences, but I always worked for my dad. So I'd work in the pharmacy selling stuff. Pharmacies in Australia are more independent, drug stores, as you'd call them here. They're more independent. You don't have the big chains like you do here.
Mhm.
And so it was his business. He owned it outright. He ran it for 40 years until he retired and sold it to somebody else. And they had this section where, you did all maybe you used to go and take your film in to be printed
Mhm.
up. and you'd have to wait a week to see if your photos actually turned out. And then they also sold kind of cheap Walkmans and stereos and cameras and this whole range of stuff. And so, gosh, from an early teen, I would spend every summer, most holidays, working in the pharmacy, selling stuff to people. Dad would always joke about how I could sell ice to Eskimos, and I don't know if that's even correct, but there we go. I just said it.
Okay.
And
I'm good
so,
with it.
yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, it was just so that was probably where my entrepreneurial upbringing came up, because I just loved interacting with people. I was learning Italian. So I actually did public school for what we call primary school up to 6th grade. And then 7th grade, I was at the local high school.
Hmm.
In Australia, high school starts in 7th grade. And then I went off to this private school in 8th grade, because I was a good violinist and showed a lot of promise. And so had this opportunity just to be amongst some of the most incredible people. Some of these guys are still my mates today, and they're kind of, those kinds of schools. These are the elite private schools in Australia. They kind of breed the who's who, and then guys like me. So
It's like you're just the ones that slip through the cracks, right?
yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
okay.
we lived in a city called Wollongong, and about an hour and a half south of Sydney. We lived in a suburb right on the edge of the city. So it was a very beautiful city, 22 beaches. It was an industrial city, but it was also right next to a range of mountains. And we actually lived up on the side of the mountain, but we were only 7 minutes drive from the beach. So it just gives you some idea of how wide the city was. And so, our weekends were very much just going up we call it the bush, just going up into the bush and forging trails and climbing mountains. We had a mountain right next to us. You could climb up the top. There was a shop up the top where we could get ice creams and stuff like that. And then, the other direction, we'd get on our bikes and just, in the day when the bikes were just your back brake was your pedals, and you just freewheel it down to the beach, and then you'd ring Dad and say, "Hey, can you come and pick us up?" Because the climb up the mountain was too hard.
That's good,
But it
man.
was just, it was a great upbringing. You grew up with a lot of mates. You grew up in a local community. As I said, and just worked. I actually started working with Dad probably when I was about 5 or 6.
Mm.
But just doing stuff like stocking shelves and probably eating chocolates and things like that in his store. I don't know.
Yeah. So what's that
So
like? I mean, I know a lot of people, they say working for your family is a little more difficult, or can be at times. I mean, what was it like working for your dad? I mean, what were some of the pivotal lessons learned that you kind of took that started shaping you in that young age that you even remember back now?
yeah. And I think about that today. Like I look at, even at a young age, I really saw, he probably had about 8 or 10. We call them shop girls, because bottom line is he was the only guy in there. They're all shop girls. And so we were in a very ethnic heavy area, very industrial ethnic part of Wollongong. And so he might have 6 girls working at once, and they all spoke different European languages.
Oh, wow.
And so as I said, and in early high school, I actually learned Italian so I could communicate with them as well. And so I loved, he was very, very fair. Even today, there are still people like who might reach out to me on Facebook and go, "Are you Phil Brake's son?"
Hmm.
And I worked with Phil, in 1979 or 1980 or whatever. And so I don't think Dad ever assumed that, we could just walk in and take over the business, or just command a position or a job. We had to work for it. I remember one morning he walked in, and I was in my teenage years and I didn't feel like getting out of bed. And he's like, "I need you out of bed." And I said, "I want to stay at home today." He goes, "If you stay at home today, you won't have a job tomorrow." Like he was very, didn't give me any leeway, because I was, the owner's, the owner's son, so to speak. So he was very, very fair. Everybody knew Phil. Like everyone liked Phil. Like even when I did my learner's permit in Australia and did my driving test, the guy's looking at my paperwork. He goes, Jonathan Brake, Jonathan Brake. He goes, "Are you Philip Brake's son?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, Phil, what an amazing guy." And so when you meet my dad, he doesn't know a stranger.
That's
And still at 86 years of age, he's still the same. And so, Yeah, so he was very fair. I think fairness would probably be the thing that defines him the most. But just a good guy, like a good bloke. He used to get really annoyed when, for example, we'd ask for money or ask for help with something. He goes, "Of course, I've got to do the same for your brothers, right? So it cost me three times as much." He wouldn't just like, I can give you $1,000 or help you out with $1,000,
Hmm.
you know. And so there was just this whole way he saw life. He was generous to a fault. Um, but he was good to his people. He was
Hmm.
really genuinely good to his people. So he was a good boss. He was a good guy. Um, and you never heard of anyone that disliked him.
Yeah. What about your mom?
Yeah, mum was a different egg. She was probably, I mean, again, they were very happily married. They are still married. I mean, funnily enough, they're getting close to 60 years now. And so mum of course now is she has dementia and she's in special care. But mum was a little bit more intense. Mum went through her own kind of traumatic stuff as, probably in her late 20s, losing
Mm.
her father when he was extremely young and never really recovering from that. But mum supported us in everything we did. She stayed at home. Obviously, that was a choice she made. We knew that we were the first latchkey generation, right?
Hmm.
And the kids who came home when the parents weren't home.
Yeah.
But my mum was always at home. She didn't go back to work until well, we were all at boarding school. And so she was great, like um it's funny, you say, yeah, and not having my own kids, I think you say you have the toughest time with the parent that you're most like. And I
Mm.
think back then I was probably most like my mum, and a little bit more intense, a little bit more high energy and all that sort of thing, and a lot less laid back than maybe I am now. But mum was always there to support us. She was good at helping us with homework and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I used to love it when mum would come and we call it tuck shop. So in Australian schools, they have canteens rather than what do you call them here? Like a lunchroom.
Hmm.
So most kids would bring their own lunch to school, but you could order from the tuck shop. So it's like a kiosk, like a takeaway
Yeah.
space. And so mothers would volunteer in the tuck shop. And so I used to love it when mum did that because you'd always get my meat pie, which, otherwise it was a sandwich, every other day of the week. And so she continued to do that even when I moved to Sydney to go to boarding school. She came up and she did stuff in the school. She worked in the clothing pool, she worked in the tuck shop, all that sort of stuff. So, you know, she
That's
loved
good,
being
man.
involved in all that stuff. Yeah.
All right. So here you are. I mean, obviously that's up to not, you said right through primary school and then you went to high school. You play a lot
Yeah.
of sports. Did you do a lot of that or?
Yeah, I did. I've never put myself out as the most sporty person. I grew up with kind of a hand-eye kind of disconnect. So some surgery I had done when I was 18 months old. I struggled to judge the speed of things like balls coming towards me. So they were often hitting me in the face. So I got sick of that. So I tended to choose sports that didn't involve a lot of hand-eye coordination. So I didn't play
Hmm.
cricket, didn't play tennis. I did play rugby. But they would never put in the forwards, sorry, in the backs, because that involves speed and agility. I was more the hitman. And so played tight head prop in the rugby, which I loved, only for a little while, and then I coached. But water was my favorite place.
Hmm.
Swimming, I swam competitively, life saving, did water polo, all that sort of thing. So really enjoyed that space. So yeah, very much.
That's intense. That's hard stuff. Like that is a lot of
Yeah,
cardiovascular. That is a lot
yeah,
of just
yeah,
nuts. I mean, especially water polo. I mean, I've seen
yeah.
those guys, and it's just like that's a whole
So,
nother
so our
level of
water
human
polo.
being.
So it was funny because we were doing life saving at the school. The school had a pool and all that sort of thing. We were doing life saving at the pool because that's kind of normal at about 13, 14 years of age. You,
Hmm.
you, if you're a good swimmer, you get what's called your bronze medallion, which then qualifies you to be a lifeguard, either at a pool or at the beach. And so we were doing that, and then this guy, Mr. Greenbank, one of the history teacher at the school, he kind of pulled a few of us out, and he said, I want to set up a water polo team. And we was like, all right. Had no idea what water polo was. He said it's hard, and so he turned out he played water polo for Australia, and so as you know, Australians are very competitive in the water for a small country, and so he played water polo for Australia, and so he took us along to a couple of Australian water polo training sessions, and it was almost like in Cool Runnings where they're showing the bobsled at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and then they turn the lights on and everyone's left. It's like we're there at the training just going, yeah, let's just all back out of here very quietly and not talk to the history teacher ever again. But look, it was one of those journeys, and it was funny because there were 8 schools in our it's called the Greater Public Schools in Sydney. These are kind of these big traditional English style private schools. And so there were 8 schools in that competition, very elite sport competition. And so he started this little water polo troop, which grew out to be, there was about 12 of us in the end. Similar to basketball, you play, I think, five or six in the water at once. And then that went on today. Today, it's now a full-blown sport they've got teams from all age groups right across all the schools. Some fantastic memories of playing water polo in a shark protection cage in Sydney Harbour. So the shark protection cage was to protect you, not the sharks. The sharks were in the harbour, and it was this huge, basically it was the size of a swimming pool. It was a cage. And we'd play water polo in there because one of the schools didn't have a big enough pool. And just stuff like that. And that's how it all started. Today they've all built pools that for professional water polo. But that was cool.
What was that like? I mean, you said you guys walked in and saw these guys training and stuff like that. I mean, what's going through your minds at that point? You're like, holy.
Oh, it was absolute insanity. I mean, yeah, we were 14, 15, super fit, really strong, and we was like, oh, we can do this. So just to give you an idea, you know what treading water is. Basically using your legs and your arms to kind of stay afloat, right? They were using just their legs, and they had a bucket of water above their head, and they had to have from basically the lower middle of their chest out of the water, and they were doing it for 3 to 5 minutes at a time. So I mean, you're talking about unbelievable, like leg strength that can dislocate a hip, kind of deal,
Yeah.
And so that's the sort of stuff we're watching going, yeah, we can do that easily. I think we lasted like 3 seconds.
Just sinking straight to the bottom of the pool.
Yeah. Well, the bucket did.
So what was that like? I mean, for once you guys decided, hey, we are going to get in, we are going to do this. What was that like for you? I mean, what was that process of becoming a water polo player?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously swimming was a big piece of that. So we were all competent swimmers already. I was already swimming competitively at the school. So, and so you had to be able to sprint swim in the first sort of 10 or 15 seconds, and then be able to just maintain. You couldn't put your feet on the bottom, so you couldn't rest. And you just have to maintain for, I can't remember, they're like 7-minute quarters or something like that. And so, you had to be super fit. So we just there was lots of laps, lots of swimming. And of course we were training to competitively swim as well. It wasn't just water polo.
Yeah.
And then, but it was really fun to see the way the school got around it. So at that stage, the school had an outdoor swimming pool, and it was kind of next to all the basketball courts and at the end of one of the rugby pitches. And so we started, like, there was a whole bunch of teachers, a bit of bravado, so a whole bunch of teachers said, we want to play you guys. And so we would have like annual teacher-student water polo games. And it was seriously, it was the only time you were allowed to be really vicious with a teacher.
Were y'all a competitive team or?
Oh, highly competifull.
Really? How'd y'all?
Yeah. No, they weren't a competitive team, but they were good players. And obviously some of them, obviously the guy who trained us, funnily enough, we had a Marine that was a teacher at the school as well. And so he would walk around like this, and he kind of and he was a good swimmer and he played well as well. And so, but it was just, it was good fun. It was, the school, it was kind of like it became the craze at the school to
Hmm.
this kind of weird water polo team that had never
Yeah.
been seen before. Um, but it was, and we would do these, like we do it at lunchtime in the school lunch break. So, and so the whole school would gather around the pool and watch it. It was a ton of fun. And so you just got really fit, right? I mean, we played against 7 or 8 different schools on a regular basis. We even played one team which was combined guys and girls, because we were all pretty much single sex schools, but there was one school that had girls in their senior year, and man, they were vicious. It was yeah, you had to really watch out for yourself.
So you got a championship trophy floating around somewhere over there,
Nah,
or
no,
no? Okay.
because there was no competition back then. It was just a whole. So
It
we
just
started, and then a couple of other schools go, "Oh, that's a cool idea," and so they started as well.
yeah. All right.
And
So
then
I
we
gotta
just had
ask,
this.
and
Yeah,
because I know you know what your records were. What was your record the best year? What was your best record?
my best 53 was 29 seconds.
All right, but what was your best
That's
record in water polo for your team as a player? What was that like as well?
we like most of the games we played, we won our games. I mean, I scored. Your average game it's very low scoring. It's
Hmm.
it's probably 3 to 5 points max per team in a game. So so the best I can remember, and I scored the winning goal. Was 3-2.
Hmm.
And I just remember I had the ball and I'd suddenly lost orientation of where I was. It was an indoor pool at one of the schools. And all I heard was my coach going, "Shoot, John, shoot." They all called me John back then. "Shoot, John, shoot." So I just went, threw it in. And I mean, it's one of those things. Jesus, I wish we had iPhones and cameras back then, because it just would have been one of the, I just knew it was a magic shot. It just went slamming straight past their goalkeeper, and you heard it smack into the back of the net, because it would
That's
make this
awesome.
banging sound because the net would actually hit the back of the
Hmm.
pool.
Yeah,
And just the most satisfying thing when it's straight, it's hard, and it goes in.
and it makes that banging sound.
Yeah, it makes the banging sound.
Got to have the banging
Yeah.
sound. Without the sound, it's just like just a
Yeah,
ball hitting the
yeah.
water. Man, that's awesome,
So
bro.
I mean, yeah. So swimming was kind of, even today. I mean, it's how you and I started really hanging out, right? Just I wouldn't
Hmm.
call it water polo or anything vicious, but just floating. I just love being in the water. Love the beach. Like the pool. It's been probably one of the downsides. The only downside of being in America is really there's nowhere to swim here.
Hmm.
Whereas in Australia, every town, every city, that you can swim year round,
I
in
can do
quite
that
good.
here. I
Yeah,
can do
you
that
can.
here.
I mean, I can't where I am.
Well, no, I just mean because there's an indoor pool.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's it.
If
Only
I
because
was
there's an
near, if
indoor
I was
pool.
near a big university, I'm sure I'd be able to as well.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Um, well, cool. And so this was all when you were at the private school, the private
yeah, high
college, or
school.
is this
Yeah,
this is how high
yeah,
school? And so
yeah.
you said you got accepted into that because of your musical talents as well,
Yeah, I
right?
was on a music scholarship at the school. It's a private school. And today, if you go to that private school, you're paying 80 to $100,000 to go
Hmm.
there.
So,
Um, so I was on a scholarship that paid all my music tuition and half my fees.
hmm.
And I lived on campus, so I boarded there as well,
So
which,
how
there were
did you get
30
into the
boarders.
violin? How did you pick? I mean, I
Yeah.
asked that because I can remember when my youngest son, decided to play an instrument.
Yeah.
Basically, at around fifth grade, they kind of have a music class, and
Yeah.
you're just
Yeah.
praying that he doesn't pick like the tuba or the bassoon, and he comes
The
home with this
drums, something.
massive thing.
Yeah.
No, drums I'd have been okay with too, but I mean, it's just
I'm
massive.
not gonna lie, you'd probably load the violin into that list as well, because
Uh
when you're learning to play the violin, it kind of sounds like a bunch of strangled cats.
huh.
And No, so it was. So I was playing the piano. Mum and Dad insisted that we were very rounded, so we all did music. So we all started off on the piano.
Hmm.
All of us except for my younger brother stopped playing the piano. My brother then went into flute, but he kind of didn't do any music beyond there. Tim, my younger brother, he stayed on the piano, but he also played trumpet. So I played the violin. They had a string program at our little primary school. Yeah, you got to understand how things are structured in Australia. It's a little different, but But yeah, they had a string program at the school, and then basically there was a couple of kids there that were getting private tuition, and they said, "Hey, you should come and talk to our teacher. You're actually pretty good. I mean, pretty good in like second or third grade, you know." And so I did, and that's where I then went and worked with a professional teacher. We had a falling out with her over one of the teachers that she worked with. Musicians are a funny mob. And then I ended up with this other teacher from Sydney, and then he was the head of strings at the private school that I ended up going to. So he lined me up for a scholarship. I was offered the scholarship within about 3 days of doing my audition. And so I mean, my standard was pretty high. I mean, even going into year 8, I was doing stuff they're doing in second, third year university here. So yeah. It was just that's how I got into it, and I loved it. I still enjoy it today. It's obviously it's a social thing now. It's not really a not doing doing it properly. I tried a bit of fiddling, so now I live in Appalachia, man. But that's a whole other skill set.
Yeah, that is definitely a totally different skill set.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, obviously, we talked about how. So now you've kind of gone through high school. You played sports, did some rugby. You swam competitively the whole time you were in high school or primary school, and then played water polo more as kind of like a club sport, I guess it was.
Well, it was school, but
it was a school sport. Okay.
No, it was at school. But the school didn't have a formal competition back then. They do now, but they didn't back then. So you had to find other schools that were doing it.
Yeah. So I'm after graduation. So you graduated high school when?
1989. So 35 years this year.
Right here, bro.
Yeah,
Same
man.
here. 1989. Yeah. So my diploma says at least.
Yeah, yeah, I think I did.
Yeah. When I printed it out, I typed 1989. So that's all I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so what's next after primary school?
Yeah. So after living at boarding school for 5 years, and living a pretty good life at boarding school, we had a lot of flexibility. We could come and go on the weekend as we pleased. And I had a mate whose parents had an apartment they were never at in Sydney. And so we would always go and hang out at his place for the weekend and get up to stuff we probably shouldn't have. And
those are the stories I want to hear.
Yeah, off record.
No, on record.
These are all in my pre-Christian days.
It's okay.
But look, no, it was interesting because so part of that was the thought of then, the most logical university for me to go to was Wollongong University. Really good. It's a great school even today. And we have a similar system. Finish high school, you have certain ways of getting into university. It's a little different to here. And so you choose a university and hopefully you get the marks to get in. You're not doing kind of entrance essays and, you're not pitching to schools. You don't know until after you've finished what school you're going to get into. And a lot of it's based on a mark, like a score. And similar to a GPA, it's a percentage basically. And so I applied to Sydney University, Macquarie University, and I think Wollongong, so the Australian National University. And anyway, basically I chose, you could choose 5 schools. I chose 4 I knew I couldn't get into, and the ANU, which I knew I probably could. And so the Australian National University was in Canberra, in our capital city, because then I'd have to live on campus. And, if I went back to Wollongong, I'd probably have to live at home. And after boarding school, I just didn't think I could cope.
Yeah.
And nothing against my parents or anything. And probably the reality is they wouldn't have been able to cope. And so I went to Australian National University, started there. So university year starts in February, March, because we do calendar year school, and in 1990. And so in university in Australia, you go to university and you live in a college. So you refer to college here in the US. I know it's more your undergrad schools and stuff like that, but you live in a college. So that's your dorms in America. And so I got into Bergman College, which had about 300 students in it. I got in on the basis of the fact that I was a musician and could contribute to the arts of the college and all that sort of thing. The funny thing was, is that I enrolled in accounting. So I was destined to be an accountant. Yeah. I know you're shaking your head, man. It's just like,
Thank God.
I was the classic case of take a gap year and think hard, and I didn't do it. I had an opportunity to go and live and work in a boarding school in the UK. I turned it down. There's some reasons behind that, probably more about what I understood about myself and that back then. It was a school my brother had been at 2 years before, so he was at the
So why
same
didn't you take it?
So it was funny because, well, not funny, but they were, so he went there and he was like a swim instructor, a lifeguard, and coached rugby. He was a very good rugby player. And so ended up playing first grade club rugby in Australia, and a very, very good player. And so all I thought was that they offered sport. And I need to turn it all down, going, well, I'm not really that good at sport. I enjoy it, but I'm not that good. I need to find out they were also a top music school after I turned it down. And so it's just the way it played out. And so that would be, if I had any regret in life, that would be it. Thankfully, I've only had one.
Yeah, I just
But
wanted to make.
that changes a whole bunch of stuff as well. So I went to university way too quickly, enrolled in accounting, failed it 2 years in a row, didn't get the picture very quickly, got kicked out of university for failing a subject twice. And they allowed me to, we had to beg and plead, and they allowed me to re-enroll as a non-degree examinable student. And they said, pick some subjects based on a degree you'd like to go into, and if you pass them, we'll let you into that degree. It's like, so then it starts to sound a bit more like an American school, right? Where you've got to prove your case. So, so at that stage, so first 2 years, of course, in my third year, I'd become a Christian. By then, my life had settled down a lot. And so, I was a lot more serious about getting stuff done. And so in my non-degree stuff, I actually studied political science and what was called population studies, so sociology. And I just loved it. Absolutely loved it. And so, but if I thought back through my journey, it's like I always loved, we would sit around the table as a family, and Dad would ask questions about capital cities of the world, or, stuff about culture from other countries. And that we were we knew a lot about the world we lived in. And that was pretty normal in an Aussie household. But I loved, geography was always my best subjects, a lot of the humanities stuff. And so, if I'd really thought about it, I thought that would have been a much wiser choice than accounting. The only benefit that accounting gave me was I did economic statistics and passed, which I think I passed 2 subjects that year. And I passed it. And that then allowed, when I did my master's in marketing, it meant I didn't have to do marketing statistics because they gave me prereq. So it was the only benefit I got from that entire degree.
That's so good. That is so good. So, I mean, I don't want to skim over this. You mentioned how it was in your latter years of college is when you came to know Jesus, and your relationship with Jesus was formed.
Should have been my latter years. It was right in the middle, but yeah.
So your middle years, but I mean, I'm not saying I want to hear all the stories of post, but I think it's important that we hear and that you share that story with us. And I want to hear it. Like,
it's interesting.
What was Jono like before that? And then what, what was that transition? And what did God do inside of you to kind of go, hey, it's time for you to kind of change gears? Like, what were those things? Like, I want God, because that's part of your Trailblazer
I have memories
story.
of my brother and I. They would do these things in Wollongong called town hall rallies. Like, so we grew up. Mum and Dad sent us to church. Obviously after I kind of recommitted in my third year of university, kind of realized that it was more, like we would say in America, it's more cultural. So we grew up in the Anglican church, very Bible-based church, and in the youth group and all that sort of thing. But it just wasn't like, even though it was more like you're part of a club, so you did the right things to be part of the club, rather than it was a real live faith. And so probably about 14 was when I made what you would say I made a decision Like somebody said, "Hey, does anybody want to follow Jesus?" And I have recollections of that being with my younger brother, and he's still very much a faithful believer today too. And so that was at a town hall rally, and then really nothing from then on. There was no real discipleship. There was, you're a boarding school, and at 16, 17, so at the legal age of drinking in Australia is 18. So at 16, I was able to get hold of my brother's old driver's license, and we could go into pubs and stuff like that, and so probably started drinking a little bit. I never was an alcoholic or anything, but I started drinking when I was about 17. We go into bars in Sydney and go out to nightclubs and stuff and parties and
It was
um,
nightlife in Sydney at that age, man. What was that like?
oh, a lot of fun. New Year's Eve in particular, because it's the middle of summer, right?
Yeah.
And New Year's Eve, there's like 3 million people downtown in Sydney, or 2 million people, and it's just fun. Just crawling with people. Back then there were no kind of, you can't have alcohol in this area kind of deal, and lots of outdoor spaces, and so we would just go and find a couple of takeaways, as we call them, and just go and hang out. But so Sydney nightlife was fun. It's but yeah, so coming back to that story, so then I went to university, and of course, just was they two sheets to the wind, it was like how much alcohol can I absorb in one night? It's
Hmm.
and so just had a lot of fun. I mean, most of the photos I look back through, I've still got all the photos of me in my first year of university. So they do a thing called O Week at university, orientation week.
Hmm.
Um, it's a little different to kind of the orientation stuff they do in America, because of course in Australia, most people are able to drink at university because you're 18. And so, always these massive events in the university, kind of in the main quadrangle area. There was a uni bar, and that would spill out into the quad. You can't imagine it at an American university, right? And each
Not
college,
anywhere else but Louisiana.
yeah, right. Yeah, fair enough. Well, yeah. And then each dorm, as you would call them, so each college had their own bar as well, which were ridiculously cheap. And then you'd have these bar nights. We had like 6 colleges on this back road of the university, and they'd do bar crawls and stuff. And so it was just there was just a lot of alcohol. Australia does actually have a binge drinking problem. And so it was just more that you just did it to hang out. It was kind of you hang out with your mates and you drink a lot,
Hmm.
and wasn't an alcoholic thing. Hand on heart, never ever touched any drugs ever, never smoked anything ever in my life. But yeah, certainly drank a lot. So didn't do too well at university, didn't focus. Um, and then, it was really interesting. So again, O Week rolls around in 1991, and this young guy had moved into the college. Funnily enough, I just went for a walk with him around the lake just a few weeks ago when I was in Australia. This young guy moved into the college, and as I found out later, he just had a sense of, he lived in Canberra, so this is costing him a lot of money to do it. He moved into the college, and he was a very committed Christian. He was part of a very charismatic kind of Anglican youth church, where all these guys had gotten kind of radically saved, so to speak. Kind of almost like Paul, Saul to Paul kind of
Yeah.
experiences. And so all I remember is he was there on the first bar night, and I'm trying to get him drunk. I mean, we became mates straight away. We were the same age, and we just became mates. And he was living, the college room was was full, so he had to live in these quarters until a space became available in the college. And so I gave him a key to my room and allowed him just to set himself up and do whatever he needed to do. And he just kept saying, "No, man, I don't want to." And anyway, I just remember we were going out for a bar night one night, and he sat down with me, and I think it was about 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. 3 o'clock in the morning, we wrapped up that conversation. He started just sharing his journey, his faith. I just suddenly opened up about where I was at and how I knew I was off track, and the rest is kind of history. He invited me along to this funny little Anglican youth church called St. George's Anglican Life Centre in southern Canberra, and about 250 young people. from early high school all the way through to, early married. And they would meet on a Sunday night and have just like a very normal church service. It was under the watch of the church pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And so that night, there was a guy speaking called Father Dean Braun. And yeah, I'll just never forget. He passed away probably was about a month after I saw him speak. And here's this little Catholic priest. And I just, in a 30, 45 minute story, like he's up there preaching, in 30 to 45 minutes, I just saw a life I'd never seen before. And all my response to that was, I want that life.
Mm.
That was it. And from that day on, there was no turning back.
What'd you
There was an
see?
interesting season there where I actually couldn't stomach alcohol at all for about 6 months. Like, because there's always that tendency to fall back into your old ways. I was working at a nightclub at the time, which was pretty seedy in town. And so, so there was just this journey. And there's a lot of other stories around that. But at the end of the day, then all these guys, a couple of them lived in the college, some of them lived off campus. They just got around, and that's kicked off a whole discipleship kind of group. And so I really put it back to my ability to kind of really stick in there, and that was the turning point in my life. Like, it was even though I'd made that decision at 14, at 20 is when it became really real.
Mm-hmm. What was it that you saw when that priest was, or that gentleman father
Oh,
was just talking? Like, what was it that struck out to you?
just the fact I was so used to, we would call it like reformed kind of preaching and teaching and stuff here, but more of the staid, or, kind of, no, look, I've just got to preach straight from the word. This guy just talked about his life and his journey and what Jesus meant to him and all that sort of thing. But, one minute he's dancing around the stage and he's laughing, and the next minute there's tears coming out of his eyes. I'm like, there was just this expressive life to him that I just had never seen in a Christian before. And so it just really spoke to me in terms of, I want to be able to bring that life to other people. And so yeah, he died of cancer about a month or so later.
Oh, wow.
Interesting enough, he was an American guy. So he was in Australia doing kind of a circuit. And I don't know how he ended up at this pokey little church we were at, but he did, because he also spoke at some massive, like spoke at C3, at Triple C Church and stuff like that in front of thousands. And here he was with us. And so yeah, that kind of started my journey. Within 2 years, I'd moved to another church in Canberra, just mainly because my car wouldn't get me to the other one. Had a 1972 Toyota Corolla. It was a piece of crap, and so I went to a church that was nearer to where I was living. And that's where, hanging out with folk that I would call quite apostolic in terms of what they see, what they understand, how they perceive the world around them, and looking at where the church was going. That was a church of about 500 or 600 people at the time. And that just kicked off a whole different journey. So by then I was wrapping up my first degree at university, thinking about what's next. I actually graduated married, funnily enough. So a lot happened in that 1990 to 1996.
A lot did happen. Wow,
Oh my
96. That's when I
goodness.
joined the Marine Corps.
Yeah, there you go.
But to give everybody a perspective, like, at 96, you're 24 years old.
Yeah.
I literally turned 24. I had already been in the Marine Corps 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I turned 25 at the end of 96. And then we got married so I turned 25 on the 17th of November, got married on the 30th.
Yeah.
And so, but that kind of that 4-year turnaround was quite profound. Obviously I started passing my subjects at university. I still joke today how I crammed a 3-year degree into 5.5 years. It's
That's most kids nowadays.
It was pretty harrowing. But being involved with Christian groups on campus, and I was involved with a group called Students for Christ, and they ran mission trips every summer. So summer is our long So Christmas is summer in Australia. And so they'd run these trips, and I had friends that went to, the Middle East. I had a buddy who went and carried Bibles across the border into China from Hong Kong back when Hong Kong was, still part of the British Empire.
Hmm.
It's very separate from China. And so I went to Southern Africa. So I went to South Africa and Zimbabwe. We took the Jesus film back then, the Gospel of Luke, into all these kind of really remote communities. And so, there were just so many great opportunities to grow in faith in that journey.
So after you graduated college, I mean, obviously you're having this massive, shift in your life and in your beliefs these
Yeah.
last 3-4 years of college. I mean, you come into your faith in a whole new. I don't even want to say come into your faith. Your faith switches from being a faith to a relationship with your heavenly Father,
Yeah,
which
that's a good way to
which
describe it. Yep.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, to me, I know that for
Through
myself,
honestly,
that's
through his church. Yeah.
mhm,
Hmm.
yeah. And then met your wife. How'd you meet? How'd you meet Rebecca?
So we were both on the music team at church,
Got
and
lucky.
she didn't like me, and I knew her sister, so that was the
I get
basis.
that.
Yeah, I knew her sister, so that was the basis for me not to like her. And turned out she just lived around the corner from where I lived in a house. There were four guys from the ANU. We all lived there, and she lived in a group with a group of girls around the corner. And so it was funny because it was actually coming back from Africa. We had a really dynamic cell group in that church as well, mainly folk around our age. And she was in that group, and they gave me the floor to share about my trip when I got back. And I was just talking about, this heart that God had given me for orphans in Africa, and what I'd seen when I was there and who I got to connect with. And she just said, for her, it was like that's when she first paid attention to anything I was on about. Because like, she always had this like lifelong drive that God was calling her to orphanages,
Mm.
particularly in Africa. And so yeah, I mean, it just kind of evolved. We dated for about 12 months, 10 months. We were engaged for 13 months. We got engaged, and two months later, I was hit by a car riding to work. And
You never
so,
told me that story.
hey,
You never told me that story.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I used to ride everywhere. I mean, Canberra is a very bike-friendly city, so I'd ride everywhere. I loved
I
riding.
wouldn't say that if
And
you got hit by a car.
well, I was on the road, of course. Normally you're on bike paths. And so I was just going through a roundabout. This old lady, she looked right at me and then just came out just as I was going past her. And so thankfully I was riding to work. So
Hmm.
in Australia, that's a workers' compensation case. And so um yeah, so it was yeah, so uh that was basically we'd been engaged for about a month, probably about a month. And so I ended up being off work for 9 months. I had to have two wrist reconstructions. I had to have bone taken out of my hip. I had, skin missing from my arm, all sorts of.
Jeez.
I mean, it was a fortunate accident. And so she kind of nursed me through that. So it wasn't the Florence Nightingale effect, but she kind of nursed me through that. We were obviously already engaged, um, and and basically, yeah, I just went through this journey of healing. And so we decided, I was stuck at home the whole time. We were engaged, so we decided to build a house while we were at it. We built a house which was ready 2 weeks before our wedding, and and just that was just part of that journey. Yeah, it was just I took the year off because I got hit by a car.
So,
So,
I mean, what were you doing at that point? I said, so, I mean, you're working, you said you were on your way to work and
yeah,
your
so
degree was political science and then marketing,
yeah,
correct?
yeah. So political science and population studies meant I wasn't qualified for any jobs at all. And this was the mid 90s. It's not like today where they'll take you if you can make tea.
Hmm.
Or sorry, coffee. I know, what that brown dirty water. But
Hmm.
yeah, so there just wasn't a lot of jobs. It was Canberra, so you're talking public service like Washington DC. You're most reliable. And so I could get jobs in a mailroom in the public service or something, and they say, and you work your way up. I couldn't even get a job in a mailroom. And so I actually was already working in hospitality. So I was working in guest services, the bar, and room service at a 5-star hotel, a casino hotel in Canberra. And so they basically took me on full time in the back office
Yeah.
when I had that space to do that after my degree. And it was shift work. It was all right. I mean, I got to meet phenomenal people, but yeah, it was never going to be permanent. But that's actually, funnily enough, where I spoke to the HR lady at the hotel, and I also spoke to the head of marketing at the hotel, and I decided the marketing guys had way more fun, and that's because I knew I wanted to do something else, and I wanted to do something related to people. And so that's when I chose marketing, and I got into a master's at Canberra University, which was the year after we got married. And so then somebody saw me doing my master's at Xerox, and they hired me into their customer service team. And so, yeah, so it was kind of just progressing through, just doing whatever you could back then. I was packing shelves at a local supermarket. I didn't mind working in restaurants and stuff like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
So what'd you do for Xerox, and how long were you there?
Xerox, first I was in what's called their document suppliers division. So I've pretty much done to Mifflin selling paper, paper and supplies. And then I moved into what was called, and then moved into the machines division and worked in post sales. So post sales was basically, it suited me down to a T. Post sales was basically going around all the clients who had bought a machine and making sure they knew how to use it and they were happy with it. And so I had my regular clients I'd call in if they had problems, and the local senator in Canberra, her team loved me, so I'd just call in. They'd make me toast and coffee in the morning and stuff like that. So yeah, it was all post sales stuff. And I did the Xerox sales training back in the day when it was, considered to be some of the best. And Xerox sales reps, probably, I don't know if they still do, but they did extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
Good machines, good product. So it was called Fuji Xerox. It was actually an Australian version of Xerox here in America, but all the same machines. Yeah, so I did that for a while. And then they actually laid me off because I was too qualified after I got my degree. Now, I was okay with that because they actually paid for my degree. But
Mm-hmm.
and one of the rules was, if we pay for your degree, you have to stay for 2 years or you pay it back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they let me go. So that actually broke the contract. So I didn't have to pay.
Why'd they let you go? You said overqualified, but
Just the state of the market. Yeah, look, no, I wasn't overqualified. I was overpaid.
mm,
And it was funny. I had a guy come to me about 2 weeks after, and he said, "Look, I've got enough documentation here for you to file an unfair dismissal." I just didn't.
mm,
It's like, no, I'm good. And it's always those moments where it's like that throws you out the most, and they become some of the most defining. I mean,
yeah.
that started my journey towards my own business, and really getting connected into this sense of marketplace calling.
Mm,
So
that's good.
yeah,
So well, let's talk about that progression. I mean,
yeah,
you're going from Xerox, you've been laid off, fired, whatever,
yeah, probably about
let go
97,
from,
98, I think it was. Yeah, yeah,
I mean, and I know, I mean, obviously because you and I are longtime friends and I know your story, I know that there was a lot of the things that you did after that. I mean, and especially now that you have your master's in marketing. So let's
yeah.
kind of talk
Oh
through
yeah,
that. I mean, I want to make sure that we're telling a little bit of that story so we can
yeah.
go back and we can share the lessons that you learned and how that is eventually applied to what you're doing now and what we're doing now.
100%. Yeah. So I worked in a couple of kind of, you'd call them like contract positions, but they were paid casually. So I did one stint with the government when they were introducing the goods and services tax, a consumption tax in Australia. So I did a stint working on a hotline there, and just really just taking anything that would get me somewhere closer to a marketing job. But then I became good friends with a guy who ended up being the project lead for building what they called Australia's national cathedral. Every country has its cathedral or its place of worship that kind of epitomizes in a capital city, and Australia didn't have one. So you had a couple of churches around Parliament House, And so they built this place called the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture. It was funded by some of the big money families in Australia. It was about a $5-10 million project. And so I got a chance to do like a lot of market fundraising and meeting some of these people, working alongside this guy, and they basically just paid me a very basic income to do that. And it was kind of cool, watching that project come out of the ground and get built. And then the Queen came and opened it. So I got to meet her as well, and that was kind of fun. And that's when I started to kind of like, I didn't need to be around famous people, but I kind of love the hobnob as well. It's kind of fun to be around these people. And that probably started some of that journey. Yeah. And so, working with those kinds of people, we had lots of discussions around marketplace Christianity and what does it mean to be a Christian in business? And this is in the late 90s, right? So a lot of the conversation back then was more around God wanting to prosper your business, how you manage your finances, how you lead, all that sort of thing. Certainly almost zero conversation about church in the marketplace or anything like that. It was much more disconnected. Like, you do this thing out here and then you have your church. And so, yeah, I then got a gig with a startup software company in the late 90s. And we were developing an online task management tool. Today, you just go, so what? But this is 1998. So it was a big deal back then. And they now call them like cloud-based products. But back then they were called application service providers, ASPs. And marketing and developing this and working with techs and all that sort of thing to launch this product. The product launched okay. It was called General Manager. And I learned a lot about coding. I learned a lot about the tech marketplace. Obviously, we were riding the dot-com boom of the late 90s, which then crashed in 2000. And so it taught me a lot about that entrepreneurial world. The guy that I worked alongside, he was an entrepreneur. He just had incredible. Today, he's a multi-billionaire. I kind of wish I'd hung around him a bit longer. But yeah, good guy. He was basically involved in our church, and he ended up being quite a senior guy in the International Christian Chamber of Commerce, and so just his marketplace picture. He would sit down with me. We'd sit down over lunch. We'd be just chatting out in the front porch at the office, and he'd just go, Jono, I just know that God has called you into the marketplace, and I'm like, no, he hasn't. No. I was leading worship. We were leading youth. I thought that sounds like fun. I'll stay there. And sure enough, my pastor even got a hold of me. He said he actually fired me from all my positions at church. And he's one of those guys. He says, I want you to stop doing everything. And he must have seen a shocked look on my face. He goes, oh, no, you haven't done anything wrong. In fact, you've done everything right. But God is calling you out here to build the church, not in there. And he said, I want to give you everything I can to help you do that.
So how many years were you working in marketing prior to that? Like kind of seeing that awakening, and obviously you're still working in marketing.
Well, no, I only got my degree. I only got my degree in 96. 97.
So what kind of
So 2 or 3 years.
You worked for Xerox, and that really wasn't a lot of marketing. That was more of a sales position, kind of outside sales. I mean, obviously some marketing because you're interacting, but then you're marketing, raising money, helping do these things. Like, talk to me about that. Like, what are those things that you learned? Because I think, this isn't just guys listening to, hey, here's your story. I think there's things that you can share. Hey, things that I did, things that I shouldn't have done, or lessons learned during your days working in marketing. Because all those led to and have played a part of your journey as a marketplace pastor.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's a great question. And so a big piece of it is, I learned a lot about interaction with different people. But in that journey, I've never been fazed by people who you would say are famous or whatever. Like, I like being around people, and I like seeing people for who they are, no matter where they come from. Yeah. And I remember when I was working in the lobby coming out of the National Small Business Summit dinner where we'd had a private reception with the Prime Minister and a bunch of ministers. And I walked outside and started talking to a homeless guy out in the street in Sydney, and just chatting with him. And it's just like, and I was in my suit and everything, it's just, so it really, and I think that was part of school as well. It just taught me these are just people, and people are just people. And, certainly in my Christian journey, we all stand before God, and there is no Queen of England, or King of England. There is no Prime Minister of Australia. There is no CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. There's just people.
Yeah.
And they all need Jesus, and they all need that redemption, and they all have a bunch of problems, a bunch of challenges, more so highlighted when they get into the limelight. And so there was partly that, and some of it was, my whole philosophy was kind of, I'll just say yes and see what happens. And so, or as I always say, I live in the land of why not.
Yeah.
And that kind of brought us to America as well. And so I found that as you did that, I would say 4 out of 5 were tough and didn't go very far. And then there was that one that just, the connection was incredible, and it made a world of difference, right, to somebody or to yourself.
Yeah.
So I just learned that there was less. I mean, we can just spend so much time kind of being introspective, and I just got to make sure I get this 100% right. And there was a part of me that learned that no, you don't. You use the term just see what sticks, right? Now it's not as flippant as that, but I did learn a lot about the grace of God in that journey. Is there a perfect journey for me, or is God's grace sufficient?
What were you dreaming about at that point? Like, I mean, when you think about that, when you think back to that time and you're going, hey, here I am, just graduated with my master's degree. I'm doing a couple, I've done some time at Xerox. I enjoyed that, had a great job there, started getting into some marketing. Like, where did you see yourself at that point in your life in
I didn't
like
actually really
10,
become the
15, 20
visionary.
years?
Yeah, I didn't really become the visionary guy until probably I launched my first business. Up until then, like, there was a sense of calling, to be there for people who run business, not the business itself, to be a marketplace pastor, build the Market Hope Church, all that sort of thing. But even that, a lot of that came along when I was, okay, I'm in this zone of, I'm going to start my own business. And so that was when I really started dreaming, and I started getting some really fascinating pictures of what I felt God was showing me for the marketplace and what the marketplace church might look like. Even back then, this is now early 2000. Even back then, it wasn't just Christians doing nice business and maybe doing it with each other. It was, these were, disciple making. They were building the church where they were. There was some pretty edgy stuff going on. And so that's when I really started to dream about this. I started hanging out in kind of more, kind of prophetic intercessory circles as well. And so you were getting lots of pictures of things that could be, that have been. So yeah, I really didn't, the big dreaming didn't really start until then.
So
And
when
part
you were
of
in,
that was maybe I just didn't give myself permission to dream about something great. Yeah.
Well, where do you think that came from?
I think, we grew up, even though Dad was a small business owner, and that, the stuff that rings in my ears is, the world doesn't know you were living, and, sometimes you got to do, you just do the stuff that sucks, and, but you make money and all that. It was like, it was a little bit, the stuff that really opened my eyes was when, apart from reading the Bible, was when I started to look at stuff like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and realizing that there were just mindsets that I think most of us accept. And particularly being in business and being a business consultant, marketer, coach for 25 years now, just seeing this poverty mindset across business.
It's funny. I mean, I grew up,
it's
my
just a
mom,
human condition, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up and I can remember always being told there's never a reason you should not have a job.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
even if you have to work at McDonald's, you should have a job. Like, and so there was no joy, no passion, no vision, no,
Yeah.
like, and And there's a little bit of, I will say there's a little bit of truth in there, because sometimes you may have to do that crappy job to get to where your vision is going to get you, but it's not just a
That's the
crappy
point.
job. It's not
That's the
just a
point.
crappy job that you're doing. I
Right.
was listening to,
Right.
I just wrapped up a book. I was listening to Be Useful by Arnold Schwarzenegger, which
Oh
I
yeah.
actually
Yeah.
really, really loved. You and I chatted a little bit offline,
Yeah.
but I mean, he was telling a story. He's like, I'd work out in the morning and then I'd go lay bricks because I had a bricklaying business. And that's how I paid my bills. And then I'd work out in the evening. He's like, and I would
Yeah.
sleep in my car in the afternoons because that's when I was able to get some sleep. And I'd eat my lunch in my car. And he's like, and I built,
Yep.
you know, whatever he needed, chimneys, fireplaces in Southern California. And I'm just like, and he's like, it's not what I wanted to do, but it's what I had to do because it was
Yeah.
part
And
of
I could
getting me
do it.
to my
Yeah.
vision. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you said you
Yeah.
started a
Very,
marketing.
very much the same story. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you started this marketing firm. I'm
Mhm.
assuming that's what it is. You said start a business, so it's a marketing firm. What kind of things are you guys doing? And
So it sounds a little dorky now that, we're no longer in 2000, but I was a virtual marketing manager for small companies.
hmm
And so they couldn't afford a full-time marketing person. So fractional, you would call it here. This is back before that was even a done thing.
hmm
I've been working from home since 2000 or since 99, so it's like, I basically just ran it all from home. I had a laptop and a phone. I had a couple of really great little clients that just paid some of the bills. My wife was working full time, so that helped. And so just really just dived into that. And, I did that for quite a while. But one of the things I did is I love the networking space. And so I thought I'll build a networking organization. But why not? And so with a couple of people that I knew at the time, we launched an organization called the Micro and Home Business Association. And so we represented businesses under 2 million revenue, with less than 10 staff, something like that. And it basically accounted for 86% of businesses in Australia. The
hmm
numbers are like that here in the US as well. It's like a massive majority of businesses are very, very small. And so I started this Micro and Home Business Association thinking this will help me get influence. So at this stage, my pastor's sitting alongside me saying, let's talk about your church. What is God, what kind of church is God calling you to build? And I knew it was just amongst business people. Now, just in Canberra, in the city that I lived, which is about the size, a bit bigger than Asheville here, back in the day, we reckon there were about 20,000 of these businesses just in that city alone. And so, just incredible opportunity to get them together, to network, to be there for them, and then, obviously as a marketer to be able to help them and that. But so that then, funnily enough, that then landed me a seat, first of all, on the state government Small and Micro Business Advisory Council, and then landed me a seat on the board of the Council of Small Business of Australia. So the next thing I know, I'm lobbying at state and federal level for small businesses, and made these great connections, got all these great opportunities.
now
And
this is
then
when you say lobbying, you mean, I kind of
I was a,
understand,
I
but
was a
they're
federal
getting,
government lobbyist.
so
Yeah.
you're getting paid by these
Yep.
companies to go and lobby on their behalf.
Yeah. So the Council of Small Business, its members were business membership organizations,
hmm
right? And then Cosboa, well, when I became the CEO of Cosboa, they paid me to be the CEO, but I was on the board, so that was an unpaid position.
hmm
Um, and and the Micro and Home Business Association, they had funding, yep, to pay me to do that as well. And so we ran, kind of group coaching kind of spaces and stuff. And so, but what I realized was just and being a marketer, we'd build these great brands and messages and help people do stuff, and then they'd still fall in a heap, right? Some of them would obviously succeed, but some of them would fall in a heap. It's like, well, what's going on there? And I started to realize that it was the people who were leading it that were the
hmm
challenge, not the fact that they had a great product or didn't. And because you look at some of the terrible products out there that are doing really, really well, right? And so yeah, so we basically got into this space. Started as I ended up in the federal lobby doing less local stuff, Yeah, so then got to meet two prime ministers. They sent me off to small business summits overseas and stuff like that on behalf of Australia. It was a really cool season, and God was just showing me just how like all the time going, geez, you're sitting there talking with the prime minister going, I hope he doesn't know how bad my business is. I mean, it wasn't bad, but you just felt so insignificant in these
Mm-hmm.
rooms. And but at the same time, it's like, there was just this constant reminder that God had placed me there in that season to be that person, to
Mm-hmm.
speak into the world of kings. Um, and It was just incredible. Like it was just like this, just for 5 or 6 years, God just showed me this incredible journey that if you just hang about with him, where he could take you.
Yeah.
And there was no like I did this, so this worked. It was like it was all him.
Yeah.
And so that, funnily enough, then got, I mean, just very quick sort of jump forward. That got me onto a Christian business leadership group because, of course, now I'm now the lobbyist for small businesses. So Christians come out of the woodwork wanting to hang out with you. And one guy in particular who I became very close friends with, I ended up going on his committee, his leadership team, and we ran an annual national Christian business conference. And
Mm-hmm.
this year we ran it in Sydney, and the theme was business as missions. And we invited this guy called Mike Bear out to come and speak at it. And that then started a whole other journey where I then went in more into the leadership
Mm-hmm.
space. It was about 14, 15 years ago. And then, of course, led to us being in America.
So what happened with the marketing business and the lobbying
Uh,
and all that
so
and the small
So
business
I went through
association?
iteration of buying and so I went through an iteration of buying, like pretty much buying client bases and so forth. The last marketing company I had was a disaster. It was a good business. We had some good output, just very poorly run, and I probably stepped away from it too early. We had to move. My son was quite ill at the time, so we had to move cities into a more humid environment and that sort of thing. And so. Um, yeah, I just one day got a letter from the tax office saying you owe us a ridiculous amount of money, which I'm like, but that's not right. I was an owner of a business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I rang my business partner and said, what's the deal with this? She just said, yeah, I haven't been paying tax. And that once we just scratched the surface, the whole thing imploded. And
Mm-hmm.
we pretty much lost everything in that journey. I think the whole thing probably ended up costing us about $500,000 and 6 years of paying stuff back and
Yeah.
trying to do the right thing by people because I refused to go into bankruptcy. And and so that was my last marketing business. Although I just operated as a private contractor doing people's marketing, and then just this, through a guy who's fairly well respected in the intercessory prophetic circles in Australia. I had lunch with him down in Melbourne, and he said, "So tell me about, like, just out of the blue." He said, "So tell me about the call of God over your life." And I said, God has called me to be there for people who run business, not just the business itself, and unpack that. And he goes, "So what have you done since then?" And I went, "Well, I've run this marketing business, I've done this, that, and this has gone well, and this hasn't. I've tried this." He goes, "You're not really there for people, are you? You're there for yourself." And like it was the most profound moment. And then in the next 10 days, five separate people, unscripted, uncalled for, stopped. One guy was having breakfast and he stopped and he said, "I just got this picture." And it was like, those cartoons where a cartoon character runs through the wall and it's the perfect shape of the character. He
Mm-hmm.
said, like, there's the shape of you on the wall, but you're not going to fit through it because you're misaligned. It was like a really weird picture. And he said, God has called you to be a marketplace pastor. Why are you not building a business around that? And so that week, five people, or that 10 days, five people said exactly the same things. One of them was Mike Bear. And they were all like no one, I didn't ask anyone. I didn't say this is what had happened. They all just two or three of them called me. Mike, for example, I had a call booked with him. And I went, okay, I've got to change my direction. So I said, I'm going to call myself a coach. I hated the term because I just thought, I would say back then, I thought most coaches either needed a coach or were just arrogant so-and-sos. But really what I was afraid of was just being something significant. And even
Mm.
after everything I'd been through as a lobbyist and all that sort of thing. And
That's
so
that's
it was
that's
a it was a
that's a scratch I'm going to scratch on in a minute. So,
yeah, well, it was funny because like the kind of the turnaround. So I was kind of scraping along with a couple of clients at the time, just very small clients, because I knew I was in this transition season. I was actually trying to get funding for a startup at the time, and I'd already been offered $250,000 to launch it and that sort of thing. And I ended up turning around and turning him down because of what happened next was in that window, those five people, just different scenarios. And then and then I went along to, that's right, I went along to a BNI meeting. I don't know if you're familiar with BNI at all, but it's an international networking kind of thing. Like it's a programized networking kind of thing. It's pretty good. Like not network marketing, but
mhm.
businesses get together each week
Yeah.
and I went along and it was a visitor's day and I went along and I thought, I'm just going to try this coach thing on. Just try it on for size in a room with, there were 30 people in the room in a little seaside town where we lived. And they said, okay, Jonathan, your turn. I said, well, hey, I'm Jonathan Brake from Market Hope. I'm a business coach. And this is what I'm passionate about. Well, and then they said, okay, so for all the people who are new, go and find the people you want to talk to. And it was funny. I went and stood in one spot. And the next thing I had a line of about 11 people just wanting to talk to me and find out more about what I did. And I was like, oh my goodness. So in the next 7 days after I made that choice to call myself a business coach, I changed some very basic wording on the Market Hope website at the time. I decided on the brand Market Hope because I already had it. And and within the next 7 days, I had 14 clients.
Wow.
It just turned around like that. Yeah, one of them was like I was at a friend's 35th birthday, so that shows you a little
Hmm.
bit younger back then. And I was at a friend's 35th birthday, and I was talking to her. We were sitting next to this couple that my wife knew the gal, and I didn't know the guy at all. And we were just chatting, and he just said, "So what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a business coach. I come from a communications marketing background." And he just laughs. He goes, "Oh, I guess we need to talk." He ended up becoming a $30,000 client,
Oh, wow.
and every year we ran for about 2 or 3 years, and uh, so it was just that was that evolution of that journey, and I realized that I'd obviously started to retrain as a coach. So I went through a lot of the ICF, International Coaching Federation programs, which was being run by a local company in Australia at the time, and uh, and so I just realized that was the best way for me to be a marketplace pastor, was to be a
Hmm.
professional coach, and it's kind of where I've been ever since.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah,
So, so what have been some of the like most pivotal lessons that you've learned from that time prior to you moving into the coach has really kind of helped you
yeah,
continue to be successful in this coaching industry, Like
yeah,
what are those things that
absolutely.
for you, man?
Well, so one of the things as a lobbyist, I realized, we all complain about the government and taxes and red tape and all that sort of, particularly in business, as you get into it more and more, you'll hear it a lot. And what I realized was, in spite of all of that stuff, and we can call conspiracies, we can say what we like, but in spite of all that stuff, people who just get in and get after what they're passionate about, what they're almost called to do. Some of them don't understand its calling, but it is. And they do it really well and they do it diligently. They still prosper. They
Hmm.
prosper financially, they prosper in their families, they prosper in their communities, they're able to give more back. So I realized that it's like kind of it's okay to not accept certain behaviors, but just get on with it, right? So I realized that the people who just jumped in, and I've seen that repeat over and over as I've traveled to Kazakhstan and Malawi and Uganda and places like that. I've just seen it. It just repeats itself everywhere. Just get into whatever it is that God's kind of put your hands to and do it well and do it to the best of your ability. Um, I think, that kind of that gap journey of, I was kind of safe in the marketing space, definitely safe as the CEO of the Council of Small Business and, and that's that sort of space and enjoyed it. but there was always this yearning to get back to being this marketplace pastor, which I didn't feel like I was able to do there. So coming back to your roots, coming back to those things that God put before you right at the start.
Yeah.
The ultimate business lessons that I learned was in the collapse of that company.
Yeah.
Learning to, like I've got letters I can show them to. They're probably in Australia still, but I've got letters like when we had to wind everything up and we couldn't afford to pay the rent because there was another thing that wasn't paid during that season. And I said, look, we sold our house and we had this chunk of money. I said, look, this is what I've got to offer. And they said, we went back to the land. This is the agent. We went back to the landlord. The landlord is prepared to release you with that offer. And it was like out of 49,000, it might have been $5,000. Right. And so, but it wasn't just that. It was like then getting a letter from them saying, we want to thank you for the integrity that you dealt with this situation. Like they actually sent me a letter, like the landlord did. Thank you for most people just walk away and ignore it because we're a landlord. We got lots of money. Thank you for the integrity that you showed in that. The stories that came out of that, one of the things that happened in that collapse period, it was kind of here in America, you guys were all going through that incredible economic downturn, 08, 09. And so it wasn't as bad in Australia, but it still hurt a lot of businesses, and particularly ours because we were leveraged against government and government just stopped buying. And so, I learned in marketing, don't put all your eggs in one basket. There's another quick lesson. But, I also learned the value of a strong marriage. In the journey of the business collapsing, 70% of marriages end up in divorce over finances. And so we kept checking in, both of us, Rebecca and I kept checking in on our calling. Did we believe God called us into this business in the first place? We both agreed that was the case. Yeah, there were things I could have done better that might have avoided a lot of that stuff. But anyway, it happened the way it happened. And so I just thought, well, I've got nothing else at the moment. I'm going to double down on my marriage.
Yeah.
Our son was really sick at the time, and so that was challenging. And so, so it was just, and it was funny because then I was interviewed, for example, by Focus on the Family in Australia. I got to know the CEO there really well in that journey. That's when I started having my conversations with pastors and helping them understand the church outside of the Sunday building.
Yeah.
But we then launched a few guys. What happened was, this is when I was with Cosboa, we had, a guy that I found out he was a Christian. So he became an intercessor for me while I was doing this role and in this journey. And he came to me one day and he's in tears and he said, yeah, a buddy of mine has just committed suicide. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, he had a $2 million debt to the Australian Tax Office. So he decided to take his life because his life insurance would pay for it. And I said, I won't say live what I said, but this is ridiculous. And so out of that, he and we got a few people around it, and we started this nonprofit called Wind Up Well, just helping businesses that were failing we did about 18 months, just helping businesses that were failing. We got together with people who could do collections, people that could help get people through debt. We had an incredible connection with the Australian Tax Office, where I had this guy. He was one of the second in charge in the whole department. The ATO is like the IRS; it's a government agency, and so we went through this journey where that year we were probably 15 to 20 people that were just in absolute dire situations, facing being cleaned up by the tax office, or we just helped them get out of these horrible situations where they were able to pick themselves up. We had one person whose wife sent us an email and just said, you need to understand, my husband was contemplating suicide because he couldn't figure out how to get out of this. He was so depressed. And he said, what you did was just help him break through that so he could find another way out. And so we were able to bring the gospel through that as well. These weren't all Christian guys. And so, in the middle of this crap that was going on in my world financially and business-wise, we just saw some incredible stuff happen. And God just turned up, and it was awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. I was getting ready to ask you, and the question was, what challenges did you face while deviating from these, from your conventional path, just kind of making that change from where you were at to going into this marketplace pastor role, and what lessons and how did you overcome it?
Well,
And,
it was
and,
felt
and I
like
heard
that
you
was actually a
say that.
forced move. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I heard you like, so how did you overcome that? And you're just like, man, I started focusing on my family.
Yeah, yeah,
I
certainly in that
refocused.
focusing on the family. I decided to really simplify how I earned money, like
Mhm.
just do some basic consulting and coaching and keep it simple. Um, and so, so I didn't have to worry about that so much. I was fortunate; my wife worked full time as a teacher. Teachers in Australia get paid real salaries, and so financially, there was a lot we were able to do
Mhm.
during that season as well. Like it wasn't like we just next thing we're under a bridge as a family. That didn't happen at all. It didn't even come close. But it was that constant, and then realizing the pressure people go through in some of these
Mhm.
situations. So when I sit alongside a business owner now and they're talking about the challenges of cash flow, and from the outside, you look at it and the business seems to be doing well, but they're under pressure. They're waking up today going, if I don't do this well, I'm screwed.
How does that
Uh,
make you feel now, though? I mean, when you look back, I mean, obviously you have a perspective when you look at when you're working with businesses, but just how has that massive, falling apart that you just told about, $500,000 in debt, all this tax and having to sell our house, all those things, how has that affected you both from a coach's perspective
yeah,
and where you're going forward? But how is that still even having an effect on you that and you see even today, as a lens that you see things through? Because I know
yeah,
that there's certain things in my life that have affected that I walked through or navigated years ago, right? And I
yeah,
even probably have dealt with them, but without a doubt, they are still they're they're a pair of glasses I put on that I shouldn't always put on. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And so
Well,
how have
yeah,
you
yeah,
how do you continually overcome that
yeah.
so that you can continue to move forward, who you are and where you're at now? I mean, because and it's been a journey to where you even now are now.
Look, it really is. I mean, I was just talking to someone about this the other day. It's amazing how many people came out of the woodwork and go, "Oh, well, you'll never do a partnership again, or you'll never do this." And like I've had 3 partnerships since. So what I've done is it's not that you never do them. It's just that you are way more careful about how
Mm,
you do it. So but it's not caution as in, um, you don't, you're just being so cautious, you're not actually achieving anything. It's more, there are ways to structure, there are ways to do things. I mean, what I know about business now, I could easily have resurrected that business and kept going,
mhm.
but it just wasn't the journey at the time. It wasn't in my resources at the time. And so, I've learned a lot about this process along the way. I've also learned that, what, it's just money. And that's one thing about living in the West, in the US, in Australia, anywhere. Your capacity, if you're smart and tenacious and you got a sense of purpose and some skills, you can make money.
Mhm.
And you can make it work. And it's like, okay, God has definitely, I mean, there were 3 months of licking wounds, I can tell you. I refused to talk to God. He started trying to talk to me and I'm just like, nope, you're not my friend right now. So I was having a real moment.
You're having
And
a pity party.
well, it was funny. And then I got into a zone like, okay, I'm ready to hear from God again. So I went to a prophetic conference and all I heard God say is, I'm not going to speak to you here. It was I mean, it was almost like he's going, well, fine. If you don't want to do it when you're ready, I'm not going to do it. But it
Mhm.
was funny because, but then, that did actually trigger a reawakening and a reopening of stuff. But um, tenacity, like I had tenacity like I don't think I've ever had before. 7 years to pay off one of the debts.
Mhm.
We basically paid an amount every month for 7 years. Funnily enough, we paid the last payment 1 month before we got on the plane to come to America.
Mhm.
And that was the last kind of hangover of that whole period. And so like it was just like there was just so you started to see God move in seasons as well. And
Yeah.
and and the last thing you want to hear when you're going through the worst is, oh well, God's got a plan. It's like you just want to give that person, the right hand of ministry. But
Hmm.
but it's true. At the end of the
Oh, yeah.
day, it's true, and it annoys you because it is true. And so I've learned to accept those kinds of conversations more. It's like, yeah, it's a little glib, but but it's right. God is working His stuff. Um, and there's a lot in there of, you need to be more skilled in this area because that wasn't necessarily God. You screwed that up. And so, being able to be humble enough to tell the story from the point of view of what I did wrong
Hmm.
and how I went about that and how I learned to fix it. So when I hang out now, and particularly coaching clients, and you've seen this too, right? People who just refuse to accept responsibility for poor behavior or for lack of skill or competency or whatever it might be. And if only they would just be okay with that, that's okay to not have those things, so long as you work on it, then
Hmm.
you can grow and evolve through that, and God can use that.
So, how would you
So
describe your leadership style now based on those lessons learned?
it's still highly relational.
Hmm.
So, one of the things that got me through a lot of that season were the strong relationships that I had, both tactically in business and also the spiritual relationships.
Hmm.
We had a good, strong men's group in the church at the time. We would meet on a Wednesday night around the fire, and a lot of them would end up praying for me in that season. Um, but had some great relationships. I just remember one guy, this is the guy that headed up the big marketplace stuff in Australia, rings me up once a week as this stuff's going down, and he's going to say, "How you doing? How you doing, Jono?" I said, "I'm good." And he'd go, yeah, he was a very buttoned up kind of guy, and he'd go, "BS, man." He said, "Tell me how you're really doing."
Mm,
You
that's
just need
good.
those guys that are going to get alongside you and just go, "All right, dude, I'm not wasting my time on the phone for you to tell me everything's okay when it's not." And I'm
Yeah.
going to push in and I'm going to prod a little harder, whether you like it or not, because
Yeah.
that's the right thing to do. And
It's
so that's
true.
taught me a lot of that in leadership, to stop and listen, to to be able to prod hard, and
Hmm.
not necessarily people like you doing that. um, and so but it very much, this whole relational aspect. I think everything about God is relationship. We have a relationship with His Word. We have a relationship with Him. We build an experience of Him through His people and through discipleship and through relationships there. And so a lot of that connectivity.
So, in what ways do you believe these choices and for your life and in your lifestyle have really influenced those around you? The whole thing's been about you just kind of talking about your journey so far, which has been awesome. But it's also showing how you've constantly kind of blazing your own trail through this, for lack of a better
Yeah,
term, right?
yeah,
I was riding this afternoon, and I was like, Trailblazer. And it's funny because you and I, as business partners, we have the Forge leader, which is our business. And to forge means to create a path
for
through the
someone else to
wilderness
follow.
for others to follow,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Trailblazer definition is someone who blazes a trail
yeah,
through the wilderness, or what I actually wrote down was someone who marks a path through the wilderness for others to follow.
yeah, yeah.
And it's funny how the two of those are aligned very, very closely between
Mhm.
Trailblazer and Forge, because Forge is actually more of a verb, it's an action, and a Trailblazer is a
Yeah,
noun, it's a person. Um,
yeah, yeah,
and so for you, I mean, how do you, and so the question was really much how do you believe your choices and lifestyles, the actions that you have taken and as a trailblazer have positively influenced those around you?
yeah. Look, and I mean, I think about the spiritual journey to the church in the marketplace, that conversation. What does that look like? That's constantly led me to people who are intrigued by that idea
Hmm.
or are already exploring something along those lines, and it's like a validation for them that they're on the right journey. And so there's that. I think, not to blow our own trumpet, but moving countries, it's not for the faint-hearted.
Hmm.
Even if you're moving from Australia to America, which you would argue are relatively similar. I mean, there's a lot of cultural differences. And so, to then, manage all the different components of that. Like, what does that look like for kids who are entering their teenage years and now they're in their late teens and early 20s? How do we build that out? The risk of coming to America, I had one contract and it wasn't enough for us to make our monthly income.
Yeah.
And so I had to build out a business around that, which was tough. It took me a few years to get that into a zone where, more recently it's really taken off. And so, but you're in a foreign country. It's not like you're at home where you can just go, hey, I need some help. Or I can go and get a job, because I couldn't. And so I think, there's that sense of, really trusting God in that process. If you want to be a real trailblazer, you have to trust God. If you're forging a trail, so there's no one's necessarily been before you, although, there's people that have maybe been on some kind of path like that. It's tough, and some of it, it's really hard to say there's a formula for it, because I think for a lot of it, we look for formulas and neatly packaged stuff, but it's just a trust journey. And so that looks like daily, which I don't necessarily do very well either. It's daily. Okay, well, God, I trust you in this journey. Where are we going today? What are we doing today? And what do you want to do with that? And then as we go through some of these cataclysmic events, like that business closure, there seems to be some things that we learn, or some things that happen through that. We can look back, build that into our story, encourage others along the way. And so, it becomes that. I think the big journey from here on is what does the church in the marketplace really look like? I feel like we're coming to a place where that's going to take its place. And I still can't tell you exactly what that looks like. I've got some ideas, but I think that's the next trail to be blazed. There are plenty of people out there doing Christian business and business's mission and stuff like that. But what does it look like for a business to be the church where it is, and disciple people, and then getting a community of those together, and they actually then become an economic powerhouse and a blessing to the community they operate in. It's a very different picture of the church. And so that's something that's been burning on my heart for 20 years, but now I'm starting to see some of the elements of what that might look like, and that it's actually quite possible. But when you talk about trailblazing, the wilderness there, the kind of the thick scrub that you're hacking your way through is religious mindsets and the way we do it. And I happen to love my Sunday morning thing, and that sort of thing. And which, obviously my response to a lot of that is, that's fine. It's but there is this trail, and
you should. You should go to church. On Sundays or Saturdays, whatever day you want to do it on.
You should be in community. Absolutely.
That's where you build community. And there's some accountability in there. That's
right.
I have, I've been leading, obviously, my passion is coaching men, without a doubt. I do coach businesses. We are in business together. We coach businesses and we coach men. So we cross both sides of that, but my bit is without a doubt to
Men.
is men. It's to encourage and equip them to be the leaders they're
100%.
called to be. And I see a world where men are confident in who they are, and equipped to do good things. And when that world happens, things change. But where was I going with this? So random.
Well, we're talking about the church.
Oh yeah. I used to tell the guys that I would lead in these different groups, I would always tell them is your pulpit is your couch. Your ability, and I would never tell them not go to church, but I'm saying is they have more influence in that space.
Right.
Whatever that is. It could be their workspace. It could be their house if that's where they feel that they're supposed to minister to people, right? Then that's who builds the church. That's who helps carry the kingdom. God created us to build his kingdom here, right? And he works through us. And so
I think the key thing in there is that, we talk about going to church. You can't go to church. We are the church, right? So we can go to a worship service and connect with the community and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
Which is good and right to do. and so, I mean, it's just semantics, right? I mean, I know we call that church, and in some cases it is, in a lot of cases it actually isn't. It's
The
really
way.
it, the way, yeah.
The way.
And so I think what we start to uncover, and this is where we understand this probably better in business than say in that institution of church, is that there isn't just it's not like this is my church and this is it. It's like there could be 3 or 4 expressions of that. It's the corporate worship, the teaching, the accountability, the ability to bring prophetic word, the ability to bless a community, to reach out, all those sorts of things, to do missions. And so, so it's very much, we're involved with a quite traditional Presbyterian church, which is a beautiful group of people. But I get my teaching from different sources. I have different groups that I hang out with that I consider to be, my church, like discipleship. And, my vision of the future is, going into a city and seeing 10 to 15 businesses led by Christians that say we're going to get together and be the church and really bless this community. And so that's a picture. I don't have a full picture of that yet. I don't even know how that plays out. So I'm not worried about it. I'm just trusting God that He's put something in my heart there, and we'll see what happens. And so, yeah, I do. I mean, I do not because I necessarily want it to, but I do see the Sunday church continuing to shift and evolve as kind of society changes and what you can and can't do as a Christian shifts as well. So there's some challenges. There's some headwaters ahead, particularly in the Western church. But God's going to build His church. He loves His church, and I mean, it's just fun while we're doing it, right?
It is, without a doubt. So how do you envision your legacy, and what mark do you hope to leave on this world, man?
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, obviously, like, I mean, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is building I guess I mean, there's a lot around similar to this, building some kind of kingdom fund, 10-ish million dollars, which will be able to invest in small to medium enterprises overseas in the order of $30,000 to $50,000, which sounds like nothing to an Australian or American business, but has a massive impact on a business in Calcutta or in Kyrgyzstan, and be able to see these, through that have an involvement and ownership, but be able to see these businesses flourish and obviously pastor and guide them to build disciple-making businesses while they're at it. So ultimately, and that's wrapped in that kind of that picture of what I call the Market Hope Church. Whether it has that brand or not attached, I really don't care. I'm not really into, funny enough, being a branding guy, I'm not really into brands, particularly for churches. But I think it's something like that. But ultimately, as a dad and a husband, is to see my kids faithfully serving the Lord, to see Rebecca get after the things that, that God has put in her heart. And she's, pivoting in that way at the moment as well. Just the things that she has in her heart, and just being able to really encourage that and nurture that. And, for all of them, knowing that my journey I probably was 10 years behind because of what I believed about myself, what I thought about things. And so as a coach now, I can see those things, and I can deal with my own poor behavior, but then see it in other people as well. And so I mean, obviously the legacy at home is your most important legacy.
It's so true, man. So very,
Yeah.
very true.
I mean, that's my number one church.
So how does being a guest on today's podcast contribute to your mission and message?
I think that's a great question, man. That's you should have prepped me for that.
I almost sent them to you, and I'm like, nah, I'm just gonna hang out.
So
I got a whole list of I didn't even ask.
So my whole mission in life is to meet the next person and see what happens. Right? It's kind of, it sounds really weird, but it's like if I come into the world of somebody and leave some hope, leave some direction, and some pointers, right? We blazed the trail. You can follow that trail. You're gonna mess it up. You're gonna fall off the trail. You're gonna start blazing a bit of your own as well, because people are stubborn, stupid, or just don't know, you know. And so I think, it's as people listen to this, it's like I don't get it or I don't fully understand it, but there's something about it that's like that's really cool. And I want to be around that. I want to connect with that more.
Mhm.
And I'm going through a bunch of that stuff myself. I'm in one of those seasons and would love to have someone just come alongside me and guide them through it
Mm, that's good.
and just be, as we'd say in Australia, just be their mate in that season.
Yeah. So when you think about the podcast today, and I think you answered a little bit of this in the last question, but and you think about your listeners, the people that are listening to this because they know you, what do you want them to take away from this podcast today?
That there's just a realness to my life, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of people that hang about me and just go, well, we already know you're a bit of a screwball, you're a pretty normal sort of fella. But there's a lot of people I work with. There's kind of this, you got this stature as a coach, or you've had these
Mhm.
opportunities in life, you've been through these things. It's like that's amazing. Your story's really cool, and that sort of thing. It's like, but I'm not anyone special. I'm called by God. I've just responded to that call. Sometimes in the best way I know how, and then when it's really successful, it's in the best way He knows how.
Mhm.
you know, and so it really is a journey. I keep coming back to my sign off, like enjoy the journey. It's like there's
Mhm.
enjoyment isn't like ha ha ha, this is fun, this is awesome. It's just a security knowing that God's got your back. And this is a journey that things are where they are today and they change tomorrow. Um, and so, for them to know that, this has been fun and it's been really, really tough.
Mhm.
Um, and but I can hand on heart. I remember going back years ago, I wanted I always said just a reasonably successful business, you know. Um, but ultimately I wanted a very successful marriage and I wanted to raise kids that were doing okay.
Mhm.
And, they liked being around us. I liked being around them, as funny as that sounds. But I love my kids, but I also want to like my kids. And so it's just this whole mix of a journey in there. And so I love the person where the personal intersects with the corporate, or the business.
Mhm.
Uh,
So when
So
you
that's
look
where
around, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that's where you and I are very similar in the sense that, I guess although I coach a range of people, I do feel like my most effective is with men, you
Mhm.
know, but male business leaders
Mhm.
and leaders. So yeah.
So when you start looking around and you seeing, just from what you've seen, do you see a growing community of individuals who are wanting to make this change to live differently? And how do you want to connect with them, or how do you hope to connect with them?
Yeah, I do. And again, right now, a lot of it is just as you meet them and connect. We really never really built an intentional community. I think the most intentional community I've been involved in is obviously with the BAM community, businesses missions community, through things like IBEC and so forth. Um, but in terms of coming from me, I just want to be, I want to be in their world, and just as they're sharing their story, I can hear what God has for them, and I can speak that into their world.
Mhm.
Um, I always say the most fun people to disciple are the people who don't know Jesus yet. But
Mhm.
um, but it is very much, God has a plan for everybody, whether they know him or not. And if we can get more people into a space where they can activate that with God rather than without him, it's a much better place.
Cool. Well, hey man, we have been at this at least an hour and a half, if not a little bit longer.
It's close to 2 hours. I'm looking at the clock. Yeah.
Okay, so um,
So much for you doing these shorter ones, mate.
yeah,
But
I know, right? I just that never happens. But I, before we sign off or do anything like that, I definitely just want to say thank you for jumping on
oh,
with
mate.
me. I know it was a little bit of a last minute thing that we actually had a business meeting tonight, and I was like, you know what, I'm not in that place. I don't want to talk about it.
I'm glad you did because I wasn't either.
And and was like, hey, let's do something fun. And let me tell my listeners your story.
Yeah.
And so now I just want to turn it over to you for a minute. And just if there's anything you just want to kind of last minute advice, wisdom, whatever it is you just want to share real quick with your listeners and my listeners as right before we sign off.
Yeah. Look, I think realize that we all struggle with stuff. We all have, challenges. I think particularly if you're a Christian, you probably live in a world where there's some element of requirement of you wearing a mask to maintain a certain composure or a certain thing. But understand that there's grace in every situation, even though it might look bad in the moment. I think, just the more we can be real with each other, the more we can just seek to connect with people and to really bless them and to give something of ourselves away. I mean, it's the better everything's going to be. And I'm not looking for a perfect world because I just don't think that's possible. But I think, that each one of us has a job to influence the world that we live in. And even if it's just a microcosm, and not try to do the heroics, just be the person that God's called you to be, where He's called you to do it, in the way He's called you to do it, and trust Him for that journey.
Awesome. That's so
Mm.
good. Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate you being here,
Hey,
man,
man,
tonight.
it's awesome.
Awesome. Well, talking about Trailblazer or being a Trailblazer and getting on the path, as you know, Jono and I have a leadership coaching and consulting company called The Forge Leader, where we equip businesses and men to be productive and growing enterprises that benefit the local community.
100%.
Uh, Look at that. Look, drop that brand new vision statement on this, didn't I? Huh? You didn't
Oh,
know
it's
that
not
was
brand new.
coming.
That's been gestating for years, man.
Yeah, I know. It has been. But I also want to make sure I send a big thank you out to a couple sponsors that we have. Winmo Fitness, who does all my personal training, but also does some personal training stuff for clients that we have, and Flight Food Supplements. It's a supplement company that we partnered with to help just kind of get you on the path. I mean, those are two big things to getting on the path is not just getting physically or not just getting spiritually fit or getting your business fit. Getting physically fit is also very, very
100%.
important part of just getting on a path, whatever that looks like for you as a mountain biker, like like Jono here. We didn't even get into
Ah,
that, by the way. Or like me, who does a lot of crazy things like run Spartan race, whatever that is, whatever that looks like for you. I mean, it has a positive impact on your life. And then eating right definitely, and getting the right supplements and the right stuff in your body definitely helps as well with that. So with that, I want to say thank you for tuning in to this episode of Trailblazers. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned for more inspiring stories of men making a difference in their world. And remember, you too can be a trailblazer in your own way. Until next time, keep blazing your trails.